Good evening, everyone. I am your narrator, here to guide you into the realm of dreams with these chilling tales centered around weddings. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give the video a thumbs up. I'm curious to hear about your location and the time you're tuning in, so feel free to drop a comment. When you feel prepared, find a cozy spot and take a moment to unwind. My name is Danielle, and while I don't typically subscribe to the belief in ghosts, there's an element that stirs a sense of uncertainty within me. The journey began at the wedding of my older cousin Mia, celebrated at a picturesque beach resort. Mia had always envisioned a wedding by the sea, and her affluent family turned that dream into reality. Excitement filled the air as she prepared for her big day. While she may not have been the first to walk down the aisle, she certainly captured everyone's attention, drawing in all the cousins, uncles, and aunts to celebrate the occasion. Unfortunately, my mom was unable to attend due to her illness, so I had to step in and represent the family. I had a suite in the hotel that I was supposed to share with her, but since she wasn't there, the room was just for me. To be honest, I love hotel rooms, so I didn't mind being alone at all. Moreover, I was at university, convinced that nothing could possibly frighten me. The event spanned 2 days, and naturally, I occupied the room for 2 nights. I adored it for its location on the second floor, offering a delightful view of the beach, which was a significant advantage. The wedding was not solely a family affair. Mia extended invitations to numerous friends and colleagues as well, with a plethora of cousins and acquaintances present. The celebration on the first day transformed into a lively and enjoyable gathering. Following a night brimming with joy and movement, I eventually made my way back to my room around 1 in the morning. I felt a bit lightheaded and certainly required a refreshing shower, so I stepped into the bathtub to wash away the sweat and lingering scent of the party. However, upon emerging, I discovered a small surprise awaiting me. A young girl with blonde hair and striking green eyes, perhaps 3 or 4 years old, was perched on my bed, engrossed in playing with my bag. Initially, I was overcome by a sense of dread. How had she managed to enter this place? However, I began to wonder if perhaps I had forgotten to close the door. The young girl was so engrossed in my bag that she didn't even realize I was present until I called out to her. "Hey there, what brings you here?" I stated. She glanced my way and beamed, revealing her full set of teeth. "I'm merely toying with your bag. It boasts vibrant hues and a gleaming finish. My mom has one just like it," she said. Then I inquired about how she had managed to enter, and rather than providing an answer, she merely gestured towards the door. I felt a strong sense of curiosity and inquired about her name. She revealed to me that her name was Lucy. I attempted to show kindness towards her, expressing that it was too late for her to be by herself. And then, as if nothing had transpired, she responded, "My mother abandoned me in this place." In that moment, she stood up and made her way toward the hallway. I lingered in bed, cocooned in my towel, as my hair cascaded down, leaving droplets on the carpet. The reality was that fatigue overcame me, and rather than pursuing her, I chose to shut the door instead. I required some time to transform, so I switched off the lights. A short while later, I collapsed into bed, utterly drained. The following day, the wedding unfolded with an abundance of excitement and lively commotion. The event was grand, complete with catering and all imaginable details. The couple truly embraced the celebration, and honestly, I felt a deep joy for Mia, wishing my mom could have been there to witness it all. That evening, as the guests began to drift back to their rooms following the reception, I shared with my cousin Sarah the peculiar encounter I had with Lucy. She was well acquainted with Mia's family and colleagues, since they were all part of the same company. I inquired whether she was acquainted with the little girl's mother and how it was possible for her to leave the child alone at the door of another person's room at such a late hour. Sarah paused for a moment and informed me that she couldn't recall any of Mia's friends or colleagues having a daughter named Lucy. As we concluded our conversation on the second floor, preparing to return to our suites, I stepped into my room and instantly felt an unsettling presence. I examined every nook and cranny, yet everything remained undisturbed, prompting me to step out onto the balcony for a breath of fresh air. I was still adorned in the dress from the reception, its sequins catching the moonlight, which gently bathed the beach in a soft glow. As I pondered the enchanting night scenery, something suddenly captured my attention. Right in front of me in the sand was Lucy, seated and engaged in play. I observed the waves inching nearer to her, and a sense of dread washed over me. Without a moment's hesitation, I began to call out her name, but she was so engrossed in her game that my voice went unheard. Then, all at once, she rose and began to walk toward the water, and in that moment, a wave of panic washed over me. I dashed toward the stairs, oblivious to the way my dress trailed behind me. But as I reached the beach, my heart was unprepared for what unfolded next. I gazed out at the sea, focusing on the very spot where she had just plunged in. Yet all that met my eyes was the dark, surging water. Lucy had vanished. My heart raced wildly, and I was engulfed by a wave of despair. I had to locate her before time slipped away, so I plunged waist deep into the water, a sense of urgency coursing through me, nearly prepared to dive head first into the ocean in pursuit of her. However, I soon caught the sound of someone calling out to me from a distance. I glanced over for a moment, making sure not to lose sight of the water in case I spotted any sign of Lucy, only to find it was a hotel butler. The man began gesturing wildly and yelled for me to leave the water, but I stood my ground. I urgently conveyed the situation, emphasizing the need to find Lucy before it was too late, but he refused to allow me to go. His voice held a resolute edge as he instructed me to leave, and for a fleeting moment, I wondered if perhaps Lucy's mom had taken her without my knowledge, prompting me to return to the shore where the butler practically insisted I return to the hotel. Upon my arrival, I noticed that a number of individuals, including the receptionist and some staff members, appeared quite anxious. I inquired about what was happening and whether they had seen the girl come back, either by herself or accompanied by her mother. However, they exchanged glances, their faces reflecting an odd expression, as if they were privy to information that eluded me. At that moment, one of them took the plunge and shared a startling tale that utterly unsettled me. It appears that Lucy, the enchanting girl with striking green eyes whom I had encountered over the past 2 nights, had tragically drowned in the sea several years prior. The room I was occupying had been reserved by her father on the very day of her untimely demise. He was entangled in an affair and chose to abandon Lucy and her mother, all while convincing his wife that he was merely away on a business trip. When Lucy's mother discovered the events that had unfolded, she took her daughter to the hotel and left her at her father's doorstep, accompanied by a letter that conveyed her desire to never see him again and stated that he would now be responsible for caring for Lucy. Despite her calls, the father remained behind the closed door, leaving Lucy in a state of confusion. With no one to guide her, she ventured alone to the beach, where the high tide ultimately claimed her life. Since that fateful day, numerous individuals who have occupied room 223 assert that they have witnessed her playing in the grains of sand. I discovered that I was the 7th individual to rush toward the ocean in an attempt to rescue her. A woman who had attempted this before me had lost her life in the process. The news left me in a state of shock. Words eluded me, and the weight of it all was almost too much to bear. That night, feeling too frightened to go back to my suite, I chose to stay with Sarah. We engaged in lengthy conversations, attempting to soothe my turmoil, yet my mind remained fixated on Lucy's expression. I vividly recall her emerald eyes, her gentle smile, and above all, her lingering final moments, expressions. My mother abandoned me in this place. That phrase lingered in my thoughts. Who was this girl, truly? What was the reason for her presence in my room? That experience filled me with a blend of apprehension and sorrow that lingered for a long time, and even now, my heart contracts each time I recall it. The season of weddings is always a whirlwind. A few years back, I began my journey at an elegant venue that plays host to weddings nearly every weekend from May through October. Some weddings shine with brilliance, while others unfold as true calamities. Being a small family operation, they managed all tasks on their own, but when the burden became too much, they brought me on board. I feel like a highly skilled handyman. I assist in organizing the weddings, manage the wiring, and most importantly, I'm the one who stays late to tidy everything up, particularly on Fridays. Small, intimate weddings hold a special charm for me. They spare me the lengthy cleanup that often follows the bustling gatherings of larger, more extravagant celebrations. These couples often exhibit a more reserved demeanor. However, the tale I am about to share with you was entirely different. The wedding was grand, filled with hundreds of attendees. The room was filled to capacity, and as the evening progressed, the ambience grew ever more boisterous and inebriated. I attempted to tidy up for a moment while everyone was dancing and enjoying themselves, but with so many people around, it became nearly impossible. Thus, I concluded that I required an extended rest and reclined for a moment as the melodies continued to flow. I awoke roughly 45 minutes later and came to the realization that the wedding would conclude in about 20 minutes. I quickly grabbed my headphones and exited the parking lot, beginning my ascent up the hill toward the building. Right from the beginning, I wasn't fond of what I encountered. It appeared as though a festival had taken place there. Everywhere I looked, there was litter and bottles scattered about. I even spotted a girl resting in the grass. As I stepped inside, the band was playing, yet the atmosphere inside was just as tumultuous as what lay outside. Furniture lay in disarray, with tables and chairs toppled over, while bottles, cans, and plates were strewn across the floor. Seeing all that filled me with anger, and it only intensified knowing I would be the one left to tidy up the chaos once everyone had stumbled home, inebriated. The couple who managed the venue came to me before the wedding concluded, expressing their apologies and assuring me that if I performed well that evening, I would receive either an additional payment or a Friday off. Even though I felt a twinge of annoyance, it appeared to be reasonable compensation in that moment. So I nodded and expressed my gratitude. After what felt like a lifetime, they finally began to tidy up the area. Fortunately, the host had arranged for a couple of buses to transport the guests to their destination, as it was evident they were not in a suitable state to drive. With only 2 small party buses at their disposal, it became clear that 2 trips would be necessary to transport everyone. As I attempted to gather the tables and chairs, a few stragglers lingered, seemingly indifferent to the situation. Nevertheless, these individuals were hurling objects and behaving impolitely, and even after an hour and a half, the situation persisted. Even as the wedding's end time approached, they continued to create issues. At last, everyone departed, including my bosses. This was the highlight of the evening for me, finding solitude with my headphones, immersed in the quiet at last. It brought me a sense of calm, an understanding that I would be spending a considerable amount of time tidying up after the celebration. I truly required those moments of tranquility to gather my thoughts. I began my tasks outdoors, transitioning from one spot to another, collecting debris and organizing the patio furniture. That required after a considerable amount of time, I made the decision to head indoors and resume tidying up the interior. As I observed the chill creeping in from outside, I decided to shut the door, seeking a moment of tranquility. Upon discovering that my wireless headphones had depleted their battery, I contemplated using the speaker on my phone to keep the music flowing and lighten the workload, especially since I was alone in the vicinity. As I placed my phone on one of the tables, I noticed something unusual. The door to the place stood wide open, and I was certain I had closed it. I approached and called out, "Hello, is anyone here?" I received no response, which felt rather unusual. A gentle breeze stirred, leading me to ponder if it might have been the cause of the door swinging ajar, though I had never experienced such a thing before. However, it wasn't entirely out of reach. I took a few trips back and forth between the hallway and the kitchen, and just as I was nearing completion, I noticed that the door had swung open once more. At that moment, unease began to creep in. I convinced myself that perhaps the owner was simply close by, and I was being overly anxious. I called out his name a few times, but there was no answer. Silence lingered in the air. I'm not easily frightened, My rational mind reassured me that all was well. Perhaps it was just the wind or a simple oversight in securing it. Ultimately, I was eager to wrap things up and head home, and that's precisely what I did. I ensured that everything was in order, closed the door once more, and began my walk to the car. I found myself roughly 30 or 40 feet away from the building when a glimmer of light caught my eye, dancing on the glass. I halted abruptly, captivated by the sight. I was certain I had switched off the lights, yet as I turned around, I noticed they were still glowing through the windows. In that instant, a wave of anxiety washed over me, prompting me to dash back, fling the door open, and stand there, paralyzed. In the center of the room stood a man who appeared as though he had just emerged from a bizarre dream. The man donned suit pants, a crisp white shirt, and a disheveled tie. Yet he was barefoot, lacking both shoes and socks. From the instant I laid eyes on him, I sensed that something was amiss. His eyes were half closed, and even though his feet were firmly planted on the floor, his body swayed like a tree in the wind. I inquired about his well-being, and with a stutter that resembled a growl, he responded, "Where's my jacket? I want my jacket." It was evident that this individual had indulged a bit too much and found himself abandoned at the gathering. I made an effort to be courteous and advised him to take it easy, assuring him that I would assist in locating his jacket. Then, I lowered my head briefly to contact the venue owner, but at that instant, I heard the sound of his bare feet swiftly hitting the floor. I glanced up and noticed him sprinting away from me, still yelling about his jacket. "What the hell?" I muttered. While I was on the phone with the owner, I explained what was happening. He responded that he would be there right away since he lived only 100 meters from the hall. I provided him with a description of the guy so he could attempt to reach out to someone from the wedding and inform them that a guest had been left behind. The owner reached out to the best man, our point of contact, and luckily he was still awake. My supervisor described the individual and provided details about his appearance. But the best man claimed he didn't recognize anyone fitting that description, which is not unexpected, given the large number of guests at the wedding. It wouldn't be surprising if someone were to wander off. The situation grew increasingly bizarre, and as I tuned in to the best man's speech, the man in the living room frantically searched for his jacket, his shouts escalating in volume. The atmosphere was thick with tension, and I could sense an unsettling energy building around me. I found myself waiting for my boss to return, so I took it upon myself to head to the kitchen and strike up a conversation with that peculiar fellow. As I flicked on the lights, I suddenly began to hear scurrying noises. I instinctively turned towards the sound and suddenly found myself confronted by the man. The man stared at me, his eyes wide with intensity. In a heartbeat, he seized a kitchen knife and lunged toward me. Fortunately, I reacted quickly, darting out of the kitchen and slamming the door just in time to keep him from closing the distance. Everything unfolded in mere seconds, my heart racing wildly as he pounded on the door with fury, yelling incomprehensible words. The most frustrating aspect was the helplessness I felt, merely standing there, struggling to keep the door closed. Just then, to my relief, my boss walked in, and I yelled at him to call the police. As he began explaining the situation to the operator, I continued to grapple with the man behind the door. The man in the kitchen was shouting and banging, and I could hear him scraping a knife against the wood. Yet, his words were nonsensical, just a constant refrain about his jacket. At last, the police showed up and escorted the man away, who appeared bewildered about the reason for his arrest. The following day, we received a call from the wedding party, and to our astonishment, no one seemed to recognize him. Upon reviewing the photos from that night, they discovered only one image of him, standing out among the rest. A photo captured at the end of the night featuring a group of guys gathered around a campfire, with a figure ascending the hill towards a venue in the background. Even though the image lacked clarity, it unmistakably depicted him. We remain in the dark about the origins of that individual and the motives he harbored that evening. My superior remarked that he might be either a lunatic or merely an inebriated individual attempting to slip into the gathering for some complimentary beverages. The reality is that ever since that night, I made the choice to forego my headphones while cleaning, allowing me to be aware of my surroundings. And I consistently lock the door each time I enter or exit. This memory remains vivid, as it all unfolded merely 2 weeks prior. A close friend from my high school days tied the knot, and I was taken aback when the invitation arrived. We hadn't had any sort of disagreement. It was simply that we hadn't communicated since we graduated high school nearly 12 years ago. Initially, I was hesitant about attending, but then it dawned on me that it would be a wonderful chance to reconnect with old friends and encounter familiar faces I hadn't seen in years. I got a +1 with the invitation, but decided to go solo since my girlfriend was away for work that weekend. Initially, I felt a bit disheartened about attending solo, especially since all my friends would be accompanied by their partners. However, I was resolute in my intention to enjoy the wedding, so I made an effort to maintain a positive outlook. A couple of days prior to the wedding, one of my friends reached out to me, bubbling with excitement at the thought of seeing me again. We reminisced about the past, and my anticipation for the wedding intensified even further. Yet, as the conversation drew to a close, he brought up a point that lingered in my thoughts. Can you envision? Even Ivana will be present. I was taken aback. The last time I heard from Ivana was over 5 years ago. She was my former girlfriend, and we had been together from the 8th grade until our 3rd year at university. People assumed we were destined to tie the knot, as we seemed to be on the right path, but as life often unfolds, things didn't go as planned. The separation was cordial initially, and we mutually agreed to pursue our own paths. However, the situation took a turn for the worse after that. Ivana began following me closely, and to make matters worse, she also kept an eye on others, the young women I was seeing. The situation escalated to such an extent that the law had to intervene, and that marked the final moment I saw or heard from her. Realizing that she had also received an invitation heightened my feelings. Rather than feeling anxious, I simply wished that she had grown up a little and moved on from her fixation with me. On the Saturday of the wedding, I arrived with a sense of unease. I chuckled to myself in the car, feeling more anxious than the couple tying the knot. Yet, I attempted to persuade myself that we were both in our 30s and that Ivana has already progressed in her life. I promised myself that I would steer clear of her and stick by my friends. Just relish the celebration at a distance from her. Considering that, I stepped into the church, which was stunning, and the ceremony was on the verge of starting. I came across a cluster of familiar faces gathered at the back and decided to join them. Yet, my eyes kept wandering around the church, searching for Ivana. Then across the way, near the center, I spotted her. She was present alongside a few girls I didn't know. I wished he was accompanied by someone, yet he seemed to be alone. As the evening unfolded and the moment arrived for the couple to unite in a sacred bond, all eyes were on them. I started to walk down the aisle. Emotions surged as I departed. I embraced my friend and offered my congratulations. After that, I made my way to my car, my thoughts already drifting towards the reception, brimming with poignant recollections and emotions. Yet this was merely the start of an evening that held unforeseen delights. After a brief drive, I reached the reception, but just before I opened the door, I caught the sound of something familiar. Tone, greetings, unfamiliar face. I recognized them immediately. I turned around and, mustering a smile, I said, "Hi, Ivana. How have you been?" She returned the smile, and in a somewhat subdued tone responded that she was fine. Then she continued, "I'm glad to see you here. I wanted to express my apologies for everything that occurred and share that I'm proud of you, what you have accomplished. I understand the extent of the harm I caused you in the end, and it was truly terrible. I hope that one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Perhaps, in time, we might even become friends." That caught me so off guard that I was momentarily speechless, simply staring at her with wide eyes, attempting to absorb her words. Ultimately, I responded, "Of course I forgive you, and yes, we can be friends." She appeared both relieved and excited. "Yes, we will. We can catch up at the reception. I'd love to hear what you've been up to," she said, smiling. After we said our goodbyes, a sense of relief washed over me, as if a heavy burden had been removed from my shoulders during the 20-minute drive to the reception. The celebration was fantastic, the cuisine was exquisite, the ambience was delightful, and there was plenty of dancing, making it a wonderful time spent with my longtime friends. We conversed as though time had frozen, and I observed Ivana attempting to reach out to me a few times. Yet I found myself perpetually ensnared in other discussions or being pulled away to engage with someone else. At approximately 9 in the evening, I finally made my way to her. She sat by herself at a table, sipping wine. The first thing that caught my attention was her apparent discomfort and the noticeable shift in her mood, yet I chose to persist in our conversation. We engaged in a conversation about our professional journeys and romantic experiences. I shared that I had been in a relationship with my girlfriend for 2 years and that things are going smoothly. In contrast, she recounted her history of unsuccessful relationships and mentioned that she was currently stepping back from the dating scene. I mentioned to her that there was nothing amiss and made an effort to steer the conversation towards a more positive direction. The dialogue unfolded smoothly for quite some time, and ultimately, I felt satisfied. She appeared joyful. And when I eventually rose from the table, we embraced, and I expressed how wonderful it was to reconnect. I even proposed that we grab a coffee soon and stay connected. She appeared engaged, and I felt a sense of satisfaction witnessing that this iteration of Ivana was completely distinct from the previous one I was familiar with, which left me with a positive impression. After the reception wrapped up, we all agreed to head to a nearby bar to keep the night going. The bar was just a short walk away, perhaps a block from the wedding venue, and around 15 of us ventured inside. Strangely, Ivana was absent from our group. The celebration went on, and it appeared that everyone was having a great time. While many were opting to stay at the hotel next door, I remained clear-headed and prepared to make the drive home. Around 2 in the morning, I made the decision to stroll to my car, parked in a reception lot. Upon arrival, I observed that the driver's side door was ajar, not fully closed. That's not an action I would typically take, but perhaps with all that transpired that night, it simply escaped my thoughts. I glanced through the windows, and everything appeared to be in order, so I climbed in and began my journey back home. The road was fairly unobstructed, with only a handful of cars in sight. However, it wasn't until I made the turn onto my street that I became aware of a vehicle trailing me from a distance. That filled me with anxiety. Yet as I reached my driveway and the car behind me continued on its way, a wave of relief washed over me. Even though I couldn't quite articulate the source of my initial unease, it was likely due to that car door that had been left slightly open. Upon returning home, I attempted to unwind. I collapsed onto the sofa, scrolling through my emails and text messages from the night before, when suddenly I heard a car door slam shut, and it was alarmingly close. All my neighbors are rather advanced in age, which struck me as peculiar, yet I made an effort to not dwell on it excessively. I had already felt a surge of paranoia that night, so I wrapped up checking my messages, switched off the lights, and made my way upstairs to the bedroom. The staircase loomed directly before the front door, and as I walked past, a chill ran down my spine as I observed, with mounting dread, that the handle was twisting. The door remained securely locked, preventing anyone attempting to enter from gaining access. I felt a surge of panic, yet I understood the urgency of the moment. Then, I noticed the lock beginning to turn once more, and a wave of terror washed over me. That individual possessed a key to my residence. In that instant, the sound of the lock clicking accompanied the turn of the knob, and as the door swung open, my instincts took over. I thrust my shoulder forcefully against it, slamming it closed. At that moment, I heard a shout from outside. Curiosity piqued. I glanced out the window and spotted a blonde woman sprinting toward a blue SUV parked on the street. She slipped into the car and sped away without hesitation. I promptly contacted the police and recounted all that had transpired, yet they appeared indifferent. They informed me that if I hadn't matched her face, there wasn't much they could offer. Yet, I found myself preoccupied with thoughts of Ivana. Even though she wasn't blonde, the Ivana I once knew would have been indifferent to donning a wig as a disguise to follow me. I promptly informed the officers about my ex, and the extensive history of harassment she had with me. A patrol car was dispatched to Ivana's house for an investigation. Upon their arrival, she opened the door and claimed she had been sleeping for a couple of hours. Ultimately, they took no action. My doubts proved to be unfounded, or so I believed. I made the decision to change the locks, and the following day, I purchased a security camera for the door. A week had gone by, and thankfully, nothing unusual had occurred during that time. Yet, I remained uneasy. I understood Ivana's character from the past, and what she might be inclined to pursue. I couldn't even begin to fathom what schemes she might have concocted had she succeeded in entering my home. Up to this point, she hasn't arrived, but that doesn't imply she won't come. I know her intimately, and should there be another encounter with her, I will certainly inform you. For now, I simply wish for a few nights of peaceful sleep. Before I share the tale of the most dreadful night of my life, which was meant to be the best, allow me to provide some context. The man I ultimately chose to marry stands in stark contrast to the types of guys I used to date in my younger years. I can openly acknowledge my past as a former drug addict, which speaks volumes about the company I once kept. I was raised in a challenging neighborhood, and my parents weren't the individuals who cared for me or took the necessary steps for my welfare. It would be a true blessing if I returned home to discover any food in the fridge. I decided to leave secondary school at the age of 15 and moved in with my boyfriend, who was already 25. I understand your thoughts. A 15-year-old girl with a 25-year-old man seems completely inappropriate, and yes, it is very wrong. However, back then, I was an immature young woman, and I was thrilled that an older guy showed interest in me. It didn't even cross my mind to consider anything else. My parents didn't even bat an eye when they saw me leaving the house, so I assumed everything was fine, acceptable. My friends, who had more sense than I did, advised me against moving in with him, but I dismissed their concerns as jealousy. I went ahead with my decision and severed all ties with them. Let's discuss. My friend, let's refer to him as Jose. Jose had a struggle with meth addiction, and I genuinely believe he continues to face that battle. The house I moved into was in utter disarray. The floors were ruined and mold was everywhere. All around, peculiar individuals appeared and disappeared at all times, day and night. A part of me felt a twinge of regret over that decision. Yet my stubbornness and disbelief held me back from acknowledging it. My friends were correct. Moreover, life with Jose was undeniably thrilling back then. We filled our days with smoking and taking what he desired from stores. It felt like an adventure, even though I was aware, deep down, that it wasn't the right thing to do. My partner was not particularly kind to me. He expressed how wonderful I was and how deeply he cared for me. Yet there were moments when he struck me during his highs. In the aftermath, he consistently expressed his regrets, and I found it in my heart to forgive him, for ultimately, I had. There was no other place to turn. And he constantly reminded me that no one cared for me as deeply as he did. I'm sure you can already predict what unfolded next. Indeed, I became captivated by methamphetamine when I was just 16. Initially, when he presented the drugs to me, I declined, and I did so repeatedly. However, he continued to press the issue, and ultimately, I relented. The sensation I experienced that first time was beyond words, and it wasn't long before I found myself becoming it. However, it didn't take long for me to recognize that I was beginning to face an issue. After a year, I found myself unable to stop using it, needing to get high just to make it through half a day, and that's how my life began to unravel, to spiral beyond control. Once, when I was around 18, I ran into a childhood friend of mine in a shop. She was a few years my senior, and upon catching sight of me, she let out a scream. Her expression conveyed everything. She gazed at me, mouth agape, as if confronted by a specter. In that instant, it became clear that I appeared quite disheveled. My teeth were in a dreadful condition, my hair was unkempt, and the outfit I had on was decidedly tattered. It was the straightforward reality, and I have no issue with that, acknowledging it. Once she regained her composure, my friend gazed at me with a blend of astonishment, worry, and sympathy, inquiring, "What happened to you?" I felt an overwhelming sense of shame, as if I had shrunk to the smallest version of myself. All I wanted was to fade away, to vanish completely. Yet, instead of retreating, we found ourselves engaged in conversation for a time, and I ended up revealing everything that had transpired since our last meeting. Alternative, she paid close attention to my words, embraced me warmly, and expressed her desire to assist. Her husband was employed at a rehabilitation center, and she was confident he could assist me in securing admission if I made the choice to go for it. Honestly, I didn't believe I was prepared, yet I also understood that I might never feel that way, exist. I found myself with an opportunity before me, one that many would not have, and in a moment with a sense of courage, I found myself agreeing to go to rehab, as I had no other way to articulate it. That same night, I departed from Jose, and when he discovered my destination, his response was harsh. The fury he displayed was beyond words. He struck me, tossed all my belongings onto the floor, ignited them, and declared that the only escape from him was through death. It was frightening, yet it was the motivation I required to move on. I remained silent in his presence, but the moment I had the opportunity, I reached out to my friend. Within a mere 10 minutes, she and her husband were there to collect me. Jose continued to shout as I entered the car. As we drove away, he mentioned that nothing would come of it without him. Yet, I departed and never glanced back. Rehabilitation was a challenging journey, filled with obstacles, but after 9 years of sobriety, I can confidently say it was truly worthwhile. One of my therapists suggested that I relocate to another state to escape from the individuals and locations that caused my descent. I heard him and relocated to Montana. I returned to school, earned my GED, and ultimately attended college. I completed my studies as an educator and secured a position at a nearby elementary school where I instructed students in history. Throughout this journey, I encountered the individual who is currently my spouse. The most astonishing realization is that I never imagined I could experience such happiness or that anyone could show me such kindness. But there I stood, more content than ever. And while my past lingered in memory, I understood that I discovered a person who cherished and stood by me, and that was everything I required. When he proposed, I was filled with such excitement that I immediately began to envision the wedding details. The list of attendees. It was modest, yet for me, that held no significance. All I desired was to unite with the man of my dreams. Then the day of the wedding arrived, and while I felt a mix of nerves and excitement, I wasn't fearful. I simply wished for everything to unfold as wonderfully as I had envisioned. However, I was mistaken. The ceremony unfolded beautifully. We exchanged our vows. Tears flowed from everyone, myself included, and it was truly an unforgettable experience.